The following episode contains trigger warnings for discussions of homophobic violence, suicidal tendencies, and conversion therapy. Please proceed with caution. In March 2017, in the Indonesian province of Aceh, two young gay men were found in bed together by a supposed vigilante group of politically conservative local residents. Aceh is the only Indonesian province where Sharia law is enforced, and under this, the two men were each sentenced to 85 lashes for the crime of committing gay sex. 2 months later, in the capital of Jakarta, police raided a supposed gay sex party at a sauna, arresting 141 men. This raid was justified under Indonesian anti-pornography laws, which state that putting on any kind of show of a sexual nature where the audience can be considered the public is deemed pornography. Several similar raids followed in 2017, justified through this anti-pornography law and a clause under which an individual can be prosecuted for deviant sexual acts, including lesbian and gay sex. Across the country, reports rolled in. Stories of non-consensual detainment and HIV testing of lesbian and gay community members, suspected lesbians being outed on mainstream media by anti-LGBT groups, and the forcible eviction of vulnerable women from their homes on the basis of rumours about their sexuality. A surge in homophobic and queerphobic sentiment was sweeping the country, and, 3 years on, the ripples of this social rupture are still being felt. Over the next 2 episodes, you will be hearing the stories and experiences of young LGBTQ+ residents on the island of Java, Indonesia. This is part 1 of Queer Voices in Yogyakarta, and episode 8 of /Queer. You're here with me, your host, Georgie Williams. If you listened to the last episode of this podcast, you'll be aware of the time I spent with activist and prominent social figure Shinta Ratri. During my time with Shinta, I attended one of the events she hosted at a local Christian university. There had been a great mix of attendees of various ages at the event, and as I was walking through the university car park on my way back to my lodgings, I was stopped by one of the attendees. Royce, as she introduced herself, was interested in the work I was doing and wanted to introduce me to a group of her friends, people who she felt I may want to talk to as part of my research. The first indicator that Royce's assumption would turn out to be correct was that she, like myself, is genderqueer. What Royce was offering me was an opportunity to meet with and talk to young LGBTQ+ individuals who had grown up here in Indonesia and were navigating their relationship between their own identity and the current turbulent climate of Indonesia's LGBTQ+ rights. What I was interested in was their experiences, and in understanding these as best as I could as an outsider, it felt important to consult a local who could get me up to speed before I met with Royce's collection of friends. If you listen to episode 7, you may recognise this voice. Astrid Febriyanti, a worker from the reproductive rights NGO PKBI, took the time to visit me and give me some insight into the current state of LGBTQ+ rights in Indonesia.
I may tell this not based on my experience, but I heard it from news and also my friends. So basically, LGBTQ in Indonesia was not really that well accepted because of its cultures, and we're really binded with Islam religions, which is it forbid LGBT as a whole. In Indonesia, we called it as a kaum sodomi, and it appears on the Quran that whose LGBT is should be eliminated. So that's why people really condemn the idea of LGBT. But again, people came in spectrum in Indonesia, but majority condemns or doesn't really want to get close with LGBT related. So basically, that's coming from the majority of society. But if you're seeing it in a law perspective, you don't really have a specific law that actually forbid LGBT. But also Jokowi is our current president that also being elected this year or last year. He said that LGBT whatever still need to be protected, and if they're in trouble, we're going to treat them the same because they're part of the citizens. So it's kind of unclear. Do you actually support LGBT, or do you just see it as a citizens who need to be protected? So basically, the president never really addressed LGBT discussions as a whole, but perceptive about that is really harsh. Like some people, since there's growing trends of Islamic conservatisms, like some people now just use veil just because it's a trend, and they also followed trends of hating some kind of a culture, especially LGBT. Even my family, even though they're quite liberals on all stuff, like they're quite the loose family where you don't really have much restrictions comparison to other family, but they really had a like, you should not be an LGBT, those kind of words. So, and it goes to the other people too, like they really hate LGBT. They thought that it was a disease. Like, really. Like, don't get close to people with LGBT. You might be infected. It's like a transmitted disease, all right? They thought it was transmitted disease. That's why even if there's a research, they don't really care about that. Most of people here doesn't really care about that. And they thought that it was a disease. Even if they're not conservative, even if they're in a gray area zones, they also kind of skeptical about LGBT unless they have some educations on it, like their friend is one of the LGBT, maybe they might respect them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they accept him as a normal being. Get it? They always seen it as a weird one or some deviant civilians. And back in 2017, I heard that the police, it's not a police, it's like, we call it Satpol PP. It's a raid that happened into someone's residence because they suspect if they were gay, and they raided and they captured some people just because of they suspected as one of the LGBT. That used to be in 2007. I don't know how it goes right now, but Indonesia is kind of straight. But maybe in Jakarta it's liberals. Maybe in other cities such as, say, Sidoarjo, where it is called as one of the Islamic, or Kudus is one of the Islamic city, they really have a high restrictions on it. So that's why even the enforcement, the law enforcers are kind of do whatever they want. They arbitrarily take the laws. Yeah, even if that is not written on law, and they had a some kind of a restriction towards it, but those law enforcers can do whatever they want. So yeah, it's kind of unclear about the regulations, and also, but what is clear is how people are perceptive about LGBT is not really that acceptable because of the religions, and also basically it's because of the religions, because majority is Muslim, but also if you're from another religion such as Christians, Catholic, we also condemn them.
So there's an overlap between religion and state.
Yeah. Basically, we don't really have a clear stance with LGBT. Except for the conservative. This is, maybe it's from gray area people. Maybe they say, as long as they don't do harms, it's fine. They can do whatever they want. But once they do harms, like maybe they have HIV because LGBT is prone to HIV, they think about that. That's why they're scared of it. There's never been a clear regulations about that. But if you're in, do you know Aceh? Like, it's like in the tip of Indonesia. Like, they have their own law called a Sharia law. You've heard that, right?
Sharia law, yes.
Yeah, they established their own Sharia law. Yeah, it's actually based on the Helsinki agreement. They have their own law. They establish Sharia law. Even when you had sex, even it's a hetero peoples, they have sex, it's being condemned. But well, if hetero is being condemned that much, how about LGBT?
Yeah,
that's going to be even worse. They're going to get, what do you call that? Whipped.
What is the perspective of the younger generations regarding LGBTQ plus culture?
So, younger generations came into spectrums in Indonesia. Since my circle was the one who usually support LGBT, so I take into the perspective of those circle. I might say most of those people are really okay, and they're really accepting them. they don't really mind. I mean, they're always exploring. Also, they're also exploring their identity sometimes. That's one spectrums of young peoples in Indonesia, which is, you can say it, liberals people. And on the other hand, with the growing trends of Islam conservatisms, most people doesn't really accept LGBT. So that's why some people stay close at, especially when you're still in a school, before the higher educations.
Yes.
It's really, how do you call that? Like, you're trapped in those societies.
Like isolated.
Yeah, you're isolated basically. It's actually based on your town, but most town in Indonesia is really Islam conservative, like, because of the majority. Even inside of a state school, people who's not a Muslim is only like 3 or 5 in one classes, and that's why people are really affected by their circle who's Islam conservatisms. So that's why they kind of had a bad perspective about LGBT because of the Quran, and second of all, they believe that because of the surrounding narrative that LGBTQ is bad.
How does acceptance of LGBTQ plus identities vary around Indonesia from what you've experienced or been made aware of?
So each town has its own way of doing their religions. Like, some of it was really strict, like in every road they wrote the name of Allah, like 99 names of Allah. They basically put it up on the road, and in another city that may be different. So it's based on the leaders or even the current administrative of that town. But in some town, because some people also agreed and even enjoys that kind of regulations, like so Islamic, that's why they're okay with it and they're enjoying. Because most people here, since people here really invest their time a lot with Allah and God, basically it's the same, that's why they're really afraid if they go defiant, and if the government or some kind of municipality administrative actually have some regulations regarding religions and how to strengthen your religions, like having to gather together and then read Quran, and also a dapa is like a preach, right? They really love that, and that affects how majority of that society works. That's why in each city it's based on the municipality and based on its own administrative how it works. So if it's a town that is really tight and really conservative, they might even it's like a semi Sharia, but it's not really a Sharia law. That's why most people here went to a bigger city like Jakarta or Surabaya, where most likely they find jobs or they want to have a higher education. They always went there because it's more acceptable for those kind of communities, right?
Given the social context that Astrid provided, it's evident that growing up as an LGBTQ plus individual in Indonesia is, at best, a challenge, and at worst, a risk to one's life. In meeting with Royce's friends to discuss their experiences with them, I was nervous about what stories would come out of this meeting. There were, it seemed, certain privileges that came with growing up as queer in the West. Regarding the use of the term queer in Indonesia, I anticipated that, like in Japan, this word may have its own specific meaning and application. I was both right and wrong. The term queer is not widely used in Indonesia, but this lack of mainstream knowledge of queer means that for those wishing to covertly communicate their identities with one another, calling yourself queer is safer than calling yourself LGBT. One rainy night in Yogyakarta, I met Royce at the university where we'd first talked, and she introduced me to 5 of her friends: Ai, Ferdi, June, Alfie, and Vanya. Vanya works at the university and offered her office space to us so that we could have our conversations in private and in a safe environment. We nestled into the room together and I explained I was to ask Ai, Ferdi, June, and Alfie the same 2 questions. Firstly, what could they tell me about their experience of being queer or LGBT in Indonesia? And, secondly, what can individuals from outside of Indonesia's LGBTQ+ community do to support this community and the causes that matter to them? Our first interviewee was Ai. Ai is a student at UGM, the university we were visiting, and is a member of Kolektif Tanpa Nama, an LGBT community based in Yogyakarta who use their social media presence to educate on gender and sexuality matters. Ai is a closeted lesbian within her family, but was happy with sharing this information in our episode.
So, being LGBT in Muslim majority country with a very conservative family, it's hard. And I have two brothers in my family, and I am the only girl my parents have, and it's so hard that I have to fit in this stereotypical feminine gender of a girl, and until I figured out my sexuality like 15 years old, and I find out that I'm a lesbian because I like my classmate and it's a girl, and it feels so weird because it's not common thing in Indonesia. And I got caught with my mom, and she assumed that my behavior changed because I don't know, she just assumed things, and then she said that, "Are you a lesbian?" She asked me, and I denied myself because I'm afraid with a lot of my mom expectation of me, my family expectation, and how a girl should act, and also how the heteronormativity norms in Indonesia. And also when my mom asked me about my sexuality, and I said no, and she also threatened me with ruqyah. It's like conversion therapy in Indonesia, and it makes me more afraid to tell her the truth.
Ai and June later explained to me that the Western equivalent of ruqyah is conversion therapy, but a more direct translation would be to call it an exorcism. In extremely conservative factions of Islam, these communities will have a religious practitioner who is believed to be able to heal any disease. The method is based on the Sunnah Rasul, otherwise known as the habitual practice from Muhammad. The supposed intention is to heal the individuals of the disease or curse that has caused them to be non-heterosexual or non-cisgender. It goes without saying that a ruqyah is a humiliating and traumatic experience.
I was crying and kept denying my true identity, and that moment was very traumatic for me. And it was 6 years ago, but until now I never be open everything with my mom because it just like making a border with me and my mom, because there's a thing that I know she wouldn't ever accept about myself. And to be a girl with a lot of family expectation, and I should keep on my track with how a girl act, how a girl should present themselves, how a girl should marry a man, and it's burdened me a lot. Also, as a Muslim, I was born in a Muslim family. I forced to use a veil. It's like a hijab, and I'm not feeling comfortable with that, and it's so hard for me to say to my family the same as I have to say about my sexuality. So I have this double burden on my life. And then I still keep my sexuality as a secret for years, and it's because of that traumatic moment. I live in fear and feel hopeless and ever had suicidal act. It was very terrible, and I kept blaming myself and feel like I'm a sinful person in the world. And yeah, in fact, I am not actually. And yeah, most of this experience in 6 year, I have those fears. And until 2016, it was the most terrible situation in Indonesia because the Ristek Dikti said that LGBTQ student can enter the university, and that year was the year that I entered the university. So it makes me more afraid, and the traumatic just recalled, and yeah, it made me to keep shut and buried all my expectation about being more freely in university, or get more freedom of expression and those things. Just buried it, and okay, I will keep this as a secret and just keep myself alive. But until maybe 2017, fortunately, I met a lot of open-minded people, mostly the feminists in Yogyakarta, and they talk a lot of intersectional topics. And it's like a new start of a new me that you can listen today. Like, I have this courage, I have this braveness to tell you about this story, about the background of me to be an LGBTQ in Muslim family, in a conservative family. And I'm very thankful for all of my friends that give me a lot of support, mostly the LGBTQ people in Yogyakarta, and we support each other. And also we create this safe space in Yogyakarta. It's my collective. It's Collective Tanpa Nama. You can follow us in Instagram. We share a lot of information about LGBTQ, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristic in Bahasa Indonesia, because we know that a lot of information about the LGBTQ is mostly in English, and a lot of Indonesian kids, maybe the teenagers that still questioning about their sexuality, needs more information. And yeah, I just don't want other people feel the same experience with me about being rejected by the family and deny about ourselves, our colors. And yeah, I just want to spread this place that you can tell us every story about you, and just don't feel like you are alone, that you're not alone because you have us.
If you are interested in learning more about Collective Tanpa Nama, you can find their website via the LGBTQ plus resources page on the /queer website. The time between interviews was brief, and as I reeled from Ai's story, I shared with her the fact that I too have suffered the loss of a relationship with my own mother due to my involvement with someone of the same sex when I was 15. I remarked on how strange and amazing it was that two people growing up on other sides of the planet could have such similar experiences. It was hard to figure out whether or not this was something to be reassured by or disappointed about. Ferdi was the next to share his story. As a closeted gay Christian man and postgraduate theology student living in Yogyakarta, I was curious to hear what his experience was like, navigating his faith and sexuality in a conservative, Muslim-majority environment.
Well, it's a long story. Not too long, actually. I felt I was different, but I had never think about it somehow. I prefer to play with girls, which is in Indonesia, the culture is if the boys plays with girls and the parents, I don't know, it's my parents only or the other parents, they were mad at me. No, boys should not play with girls. But I just comfortable playing with girls. But I never realized that I'm different until I hit my puberty when I was in junior high school. I just feel that it's strange. I mean, like, why am I different with the others, with the others boys? And because these things, I never knew about these things before. It's totally strange. There's no education or information about what is gay, what is LGBT, what is homosexuality. I never heard about it, even in school, in church, or from my family. I never heard about it, and also there no one like that in my family as I knew it. But I tried to find the information about it on the internet, and as a Christian, I found some resources that say that it's a sin. It's totally a sin. It's wrong. Maybe I'm condemned, or I should be condemned. Should be go to hell, and should change my sexual orientation. So it makes me so. I just pray like every day. God, please makes me straight. Please makes me a straight man. I did it for like 6 years. 6 years from the first time I hit my puberty, like in the first grade of my junior high school, until I graduated from senior high school. I go to college. I go to university. I took Bachelor of Theology because actually my dream was about to be a pastor from a child. It has nothing to do with my sexual orientation. It just, I want to be a pastor. Then I took it. I took theology. Then I was so blessed that I went to the theological school who somehow support LGBTIQ people. Like they talk about it in academic way. They have progressive biblical hermeneutics about LGBT. So I learned about it, and it took 1 year until I can accept myself as a gay and Christian at the same time. And I think it's important for me. It's really important for me to accept myself as a gay. But I haven't come out to my parents yet until now. There are many things to be considered because I'm the only child in my family, and that's quite a problem because in Indonesia that every family they will have like descendant, they will have child, and their child will marry someone and build a new family and give birth, and my parents want to have grandchildren, something like that. So yeah, it's a cultural thing in Indonesia, and then, so it makes me think to not to come out yet to my parents and to hold my family. But somehow, as a gay who has feeling, who has I just want to have experience like how is it being loved, how is it like having relationship with another man freely. I like, because I'm the only child and my parents always know where I'm going, where am I every time. They should know, like who are my friends, they should know. So I just kind of I'm restricted to have friends. I'm restricted to not freely, cannot express myself, cannot have LGBT friends. Yeah. So I quietly like use dating application. I just want to have experience how is it having relationship with men. I mean, like why the heterosexual people can freely have like that, but why I cannot? I mean, like it's not fair for me. finally I had some relationship with a man, a few men. And then someone introduced me a platform or a community or a forum that people can join and talk about religion and sexuality at the same time. So it's an organization that focuses on the interreligious and also sexuality diversity. They have a program called Queer Camp, and I joined that. So that's the place that I can feel like I'm at home. So I just continue my theological study, and until now I have kind of perspective that, well, I accept that firstly, I was born as a sexual being. Then a religious being is the other thing. The next, after I become a sexual being. The first, I'm a sexual being. So I cannot ignore my. It's the way I am. It's the way I live as a being, as a human. Sexuality is my nature. It's given, and I embrace it. It's as a God's grace for me.
Based on the experiences that you've had, I wanted to ask you, is there anything that individuals outside of the LGBTQ plus community of Indonesia can be doing to support your community?
You know that in Indonesia, most people think that being a gay or being a queer is something that is not indigenously, something not indigenous. I mean, like, they are from outside. They're from west. And I just think that how possibly that people think like this? So I just hope that when outside people see the reality here in Indonesia, they can also share experience and also share knowledge that it's not a strange thing. It's not only from West. It just can happen to everyone anywhere. Like, it doesn't belong to any race or it doesn't belong to any countries. It's just about humanity. It's just people. So I hope that we can share about this, the dialogue about, the struggle as a human being, as a sexual being, and also to educate people. But sometimes the matter is like this: if people from outside try to educate people here, they think oh no, it's from West. It's not East culture. It's not Eastern culture. I mean, like, they don't understand us, something like that. So I think they can also encourage people like from here to share this experience, so we can have dialogue.
Although both Ai and Ferdi's stories are unique and distinct in their own ways, there were undeniable parallels. Both brought up the issue of familial obligation and social roles. Ai being expected to behave as girls and women are supposed to in Indonesian society, with a presumption of heterosexuality inextricably intertwined into that expectation. Ferdi also struggles with the assumption that he will eventually marry and provide grandchildren to his parents. Both also struggle with the religious aspect of their identities. Ai resisting her family's highly conservative, more extreme Islamic beliefs and convictions, and Ferdi endeavouring to make peace with being both a gay man and a Christian. In these interviews, two pillars of Indonesian society are evident: faith and family. Of course, neither of these are threatened by LGBT rights and self-expression, but the cis-normative, heteronormative foundations upon which both concepts are built will need to be addressed and adapted if people like Ai and Ferdi are to find support, solidarity, and acceptance in wider Indonesian society. Ai and Ferdi's requests for outside engagement were clear and unambiguous. Mental health support and education is necessary to dispel myths regarding LGBT identities, and many Indonesians will only listen to other Indonesians on these kinds of matters. As Ferdi said, this is not a matter of race or culture, but of humanity. Indonesians don't need to hear stories from Western LGBTQ+ culture. They need to hear about the experiences and struggles of their fellow citizens. And in our next episode, we will be sharing June and Alfie's stories, with the intention of shedding light on what it means to be binary and non-binary transgender individuals growing up in Indonesia. Tune in next time for part 2 of Queer Voices in Yogyakarta. This episode of the /Queer podcast was edited by Sam Clay and scripted and produced by me, Georgie Williams. A very special thanks to Astrid Febriyanti for her help on this episode and episode 7, and to Ai, Ferdi, Vanya and Royce for their contributions. Thanks once again to my Patreon subscribers who are still supporting this project in the midst of widespread financial uncertainty and a global crisis. These stories are now being listened to in 52 countries around the world, and it is exciting and heartwarming to know that, in spite of our struggles, we are connecting as a community, and you're helping make this happen. If you're not a Patreon and you fancy pitching in to make these episodes happen, you can find the /Queer Patreon at patreon.com/queer. That's SLASH queer. The link is also available on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. I'm grateful for anything that you can give to this work, no matter how small your contribution. This episode was recorded on location in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Music in this episode was composed by Kevin MacLeod. If you enjoyed this episode or have any feedback, please get in touch on Instagram or Twitter at @/queer, or email us at /queer@outlook.com. In spite of all that we face in these uncertain times, remember to stay kind, stay radical, and stay queer.
You can see that on the news in 2017. That happens because they suspect some homo activity. That's what.
I think I need to rename my podcast Some Homo Activity.
Exactly. That would be so cool. Like, is this a comedian or